Dynasty is going to change Flesh and Blood for the better. As we lead up to spoiler season, we have already been blessed with a few goodies, and oh boy, they have been spicy. And speaking of which, my spoiler drops November 1st, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. From guns and powder kegs to the almighty rock, big buff shields and niche but powerful armor, Dynasty looks to be a set that is focused on weapons and equipment. And if Dynasty is packed with a myriad of different options for each class, then this could be the best set for the diversity of the game that we have seen yet.
Huge thank you to all of my supporters. If you'd like to join the Chad Army, you can either become a channel member or join my Patreon with the link in the description. And if it's cards you want, you can use my affiliate link to Red Riot Games to help support me as well.
One very common complaint about Flesh and Blood is that the legendary equipment are too expensive of a buy-in for new players. Now, I personally disagree that the legendary cards are too expensive, as you can use them in multiple decks for long periods of time. However, there are plenty of people who are put off by them. And up until now, the only other armor options are common pieces and 1 or 2 majestic pieces for each class. And even then, some of those cheaper majestic options have been banned in Blitz, which is the most popular format for newer players. But Dynasty looks to be changing that. So far, almost all of the cards we have seen have something to do with weapons and armor, and I don't think that's by accident. I am a firm believer that at the highest levels of play, yes, you do want the best equipment. But for the average player who just goes to a local armory once or twice a week and casually enjoys the hobby, those players aren't nearly as inclined to spend hundreds of dollars just on equipment, and so having a suite of lesser rarity options for them is an absolute boon. In fact, I would argue that having strong but affordable pieces of armor is a great way to get people into competitive in the long term. Not everyone is going to try Flesh and Blood and immediately take to the game and throw all of their money at it. I've seen some people do this, I did this, but a lot of other people are going to take time getting latched into the game before they're willing to spend a lot of money. I used to play games on a budget because once upon a time, I felt like $10 for a single card was absurd. Now, well, I spent $1,000 on a cold foil library of Solana, so what does that tell you? But I didn't start off that way. I spent years playing on a budget, playing very cheap decks before I eventually started to take the hobby more seriously, and it became the #1 thing that I do and spend my time and money on. And there are going to be plenty of people who are like this with Flesh and Blood. Give them strong but affordable armor pieces that might not be as good as the legendaries but can still stand up to them, and those players will stick around with the game and might one day become genuinely entrenched and competitive players. Having tons of different weapons and armor doesn't just benefit the budget and casual crowd. One issue that Flesh and Blood has is just that the game is still pretty new, so the card pool isn't as deep as other more entrenched games. And while expanding the main board card pool for every class is critically important, with all the classes in Flesh and Blood, it's kind of a difficult thing to do and it's going to take time. But giving each hero and class a bunch of new weapons and armor is a very easy and fantastic way to diversify the game and add a ton of creativity. Take Dorinthia for example. In my personal build, I can either play offensively or defensively just by switching out a few cards. If I want to be offensive, I run Helm of the Sharp Eye and Courage of Bladehold, and if I want to be defensive, I side in 3 red Steelblade Shunts, I play Fandal Spring Tunic to take advantage of them, and I swap out the Helm of the Sharp Eye for Arcanite Skullcap. And while it's only a few cards I'm changing around, it fundamentally changes how I play the deck. Now imagine if we get a whole crap ton of different armor and weapons of different rarities with wildly different ability. The floodgates will be open and you can get as creative as you would like. And the weapons can especially be important here. Dawnblade Dory plays very differently to Axe's Dory, which will play very differently to Dagger's Dory, which I'm absolutely going to be building. And as the game expands and we get more and more options, I can actually see one day some random person bringing this weird amalgamation of a deck, running some weird armor pieces or a weapon that people have long forgotten even existed, and just dominating the current meta with it. This actually happened in Pokemon in 2016, where one mad lad brought a Mega Audino deck because he figured out that it perfectly countered the top deck, which was Night March, and he took down the whole event, catching everybody by surprise. I can absolutely see something like this happening in Flesh and Blood one day. So while the whole of Dynasty obviously hasn't been spoiled yet, I genuinely believe we're going to see some wild designs for armor and weapons. Although obviously that doesn't mean that all heroes are going to be treated equally, and some will still be better than others. That's an inevitability of a trading card game. But I do hope that this leads us to seeing different variants of each hero that are actually viable. Either way, Dynasty is looking to be a 10 out of 10 set. Although 9 of those points are due to the brilliance of the almighty rock.